Ölgen ko'chalarda Ümit üzme aziz xalqim, Ümit üzme ey ana yurt. Biz atlandık bu küreşke, Uyul taştak uyuşup. Allah verse bu nusretni, bizgilerimiz sep bulup, zalimlarni yığlatgudek, Uğuz gibi küçlük bulup. Lepildeydi asminanda, göz çaknitip şu günü, ay yıldızlık gök bayrağım, ey ana makan, ay yıldızlık gök bayrağım.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear brothers and sisters, welcome to another special episode of Talk is Turkestan. I have a very special guest joining me today. His name is Brent E. Huffman. Brent E. Huffman is an award-winning director, producer, writer, and cinematographer of documentaries and television programs. His work ranges from documentaries aired on Netflix, Vice, the Discovery Channel, the National Geographic Channel, NBC, CNN, PBS, MTV, and Al Jazeera, to Sundance Film Festival premieres, to ethnographic films made for the China Exploration Research Society. Now, he's got a really, a really large biography. I've put the link there to his full biography. Please go and check that out. Today, we'll be discussing his latest for Vice. Again, that documentary is also in our description, called The Uyghurs Who Fled China Now Face Repression in Pakistan. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Brent to our show. Welcome, Brent. Thank you for accepting our invitation today.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for talking about this really important issue.
I'm sure you've seen we talk about this. I'm Uyghur, and we are very heavily invested in the work that we do, and it's just great to see someone shed a light on this. And we do have a lot of people in Pakistan right now, and people of Pakistani origin watching with us today. So they may pose some questions. So I again remind my audience today that if you do have any questions, I will pick a few towards the end of our show today. So I guess I'll get right to it with the questions, and just basically start with a broad question and ask you, what is life like for Uyghurs in Pakistan? And how has that changed over the years, especially now that Pakistan's romance with China is growing, as described by the founder for the Pakistan-China Institute? Probably one of the cringiest parts of the documentary for me. We'll start with that.
So I'll paraphrase maybe what that person says in the documentary. So for a long time, China and Pakistan were considered these iron brothers, right? Where they spoke about each other in this really romantic language, like the relationship is sweeter than honey and higher than the Himalayan mountains and stronger than steel. And when I first started working in Pakistan 4 years ago, lots of people echoed that and would repeat that comment that, China's Pakistan's best friend, and at the core of the documentary is the CPEC project, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which is a $70 billion project, mainly consisting of loans from China to build infrastructure and power plants and the Gwadar port inside Pakistan. And what's important about CPEC is it's also the flagship project for the One Belt, One Road project, which is sort of this massive reimagining of the Silk Road, where China is connecting to many different countries in Asia and Europe, in Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. And I think that project is about is something like $70 trillion costs of this massive project. And there are several thousand Uyghurs in Pakistan, and basically because of the CPEC project, China is putting pressure on Pakistan to do some of the things that you see in the film, like have Uyghurs be sent back to China. One thing the film doesn't talk about, there were about a few years ago, there was about 200 Uyghur spouses of Pakistani citizens that were forced to return to China, that were put into these re-education concentration camps. So it's this CPEC project that Pakistan wants it to be successful, and China is kind of able to leverage Pakistan and sort of force their hand to repress Uyghurs, to have Uyghurs be sent back to, as you see in the film, it's this really sort of scary document of collecting data about Pakistani Uyghurs living in Pakistan, that is essentially collecting this data that will potentially be used against them. And you also see in my film, sort of at the center of the story, is this Uyghur school teacher, this activist whose school had been completely shut down and destroyed, and who's now trying to help. He's this really incredible, very brave, inspiring person trying to help Uyghurs flee China and flee this persecution.
Yeah, in the documentary, you described him as sort of living in hiding, or living in secret. Are all Uyghurs in that situation, or is that only for activists?
That's a great question. So no, and I think, like I said, CPEC is kind of is sort of the reason why Uyghurs are being persecuted. I think in general, in the past, Uyghurs have not had a bad relationship with Pakistan. It's really CPEC putting this pressure on them. So there are, or that in the past there have been Uyghurs that have businesses. There's a Uyghur area that was in Rawalpindi that was successful with restaurants and businesses. I think it's only when CPEC becomes an issue, or when CPEC starts to ramp up, where we see this pressure put down on Uyghurs as a whole. But yeah, they are currently not living in hiding. Umair is sort of a different situation because he's really been speaking out and really has sort of been a human rights voice for this story.
Now, as you mentioned, you do in your documentary film Muhammad Umar Khan, a Uyghur activist, and his family, who are desperately trying to keep the Uyghur culture alive in Pakistan, and in doing so is being seen as an enemy by China. Did they seem threatening to you, or did any sort of terrorism, was there an ounce of terrorism coming through?
No, none whatsoever. No, these are wonderful human beings, and I should say the Uyghur cause is close to my heart. No, there's no threat whatsoever. These are wonderful people that are just trying to live their lives. They just want a positive future for their children. Yeah, there's the terrorism narrative is completely false.
I want you to share something from the documentary, like with Umar, perhaps an experience that didn't make the final cut of that documentary. Would that be possible?
Sure. You mean just anything that was not in the.
Yeah. Just an experience, something that was intriguing to you, that you saw in the work that he does that didn't make that final cut. Is there anything like that?
I mean, I think the big thing that didn't make it because it was so complicated is this issue from a few years ago where, like I sort of mentioned, Pakistani citizens in Islamabad and different cities were having their Uyghur wives, forcibly removed from their homes and put into these sort of re-education camps in in China. So I actually interviewed several of the husbands that had this happen. Some lost their wives for a year. Some of the wives have returned. Some of them have just sort of disappeared. And it was just a really harrowing, kind of nightmarish story. These mothers that had young children at home in Pakistan, being removed, and it just, unfortunately didn't make it into the film. But I think it's an important story.
So we see a lot of Chinese propaganda coming through, showing a general Pakistani citizen as being happy with the influx of Chinese coming in and the apparent opportunity that they bring. How true is that on the ground?
Yeah. So like I said, I do think the average Pakistani citizen has a good relationship with Uyghurs in Pakistan. So yeah, that was never anything that I witnessed, that there were any sort of, I don't know, any kind of threat from Pakistanis whatsoever. I think, I was sort of surprised that, a lot of Pakistani citizens were unaware of the Uyghur issue inside Xinjiang and inside China at all. So it's not a matter of Chinese or Pakistani citizens. It's really this government pressure, police officers working under the government that are being pressured from CPEC to, do some of these things I talk about.
We have a question here. I believe this person is Pakistani himself. He asks, what Pakistani should do about this situation, because the hype of Pakistan-China friendship is so high. And I'm thinking, what should your general citizen do you think? What would you advise them do? And I guess you sort of pointed out they sort of need to educate themselves if they're not getting the news about what's happening just over the border.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's sort of a complicated answer. I'm afraid. And I should state, I've done documentaries about China's push into Africa, economic push into Afghanistan. So the starting point, I think, would be to educate yourself about the Uyghur issue within China. And like you said, there's a lot of propaganda. There's a lot of just talk that this isn't an issue, that the Uyghurs aren't being put into camps, that they aren't being persecuted, and that propaganda is just completely false. So educate yourself on sort of the reality of the situation, inside China for Uyghurs, but also I think educating yourself about the relationship that China has had in the past with other countries, where things sort of haven't gone so well, and where these economic projects that seem so promising, right, where China is really sort of promising, there'll be all this development and there'll be all of these jobs and prosperity for the average Pakistani citizen, that these things, at least in the past examples, have not been true. And where we see, China, there's this concept of a debt trap where China is providing these loans that the country can never possibly pay off, and that's part of the interest from China to get involved with these countries, and then these economic projects end with China sort of taking ownership of part of the project. There's examples of China taking over ports, like in Sri Lanka. So a lot of this, like I talked about, this romantic language about China being Pakistan's best friend, and China being the solution to all of Pakistan's problems. I think those things are just not true, and I think Pakistani citizens should look at it with more of a critical eye, and I think that's happening now. I think the China-Pakistan romance is not as strong as it was a few years ago.
Yeah, I mean, even we have seen some clerics come out and talk about this issue, which should bring a lot more light to the issue. And you've sort of mentioned this, that you've covered Africa and other regions where China is really taking over the world. And even towards the end of the documentary, Mohammed was like, well, our fear is, Pakistan could potentially just become another province of China. And it sort of goes into my next question, and you've sort of already talked about it. One of the main reasons why Pakistan is relying heavily on China is for economic reasons, but it seems as though Pakistan may be biting off more than it can chew, going deeper into debt, as you've mentioned, whilst on the surface seemingly developing. Is there a worry that Pakistan won't be able to pay back its debt to China, and what could potentially be the consequences of that? And as you mentioned, Sri Lanka, losing ownership, and
Yeah, so that's a great question, and obviously I can't foresee the future, or don't have any sort of inside knowledge on this per se, but there have been sort of scary things happening in Gwadar, and one thing you see in the film is that it's not just Uyghurs that are being hurt from the CPEC project. It's people in Balochistan who are really losing out. In Balochistan, there is a major port, a major fishing port for the people of Balochistan. There are lots of talks and rumors that could become a military base for China. There are these rumors that nuclear subs have been seen passing through or staying there. And then there was this really sort of disturbing thing that happened where a fence was put up around Gwadar, and people in Balochistan, the citizens there, weren't allowed to enter the area, right? So there was talk that in addition to this military base, in addition to this port, that Gwadar might become like sort of this exclusive Dubai-like Chinese city where Chinese citizens could kind of stay in these luxury apartments. And then the people of Balochistan would be totally locked out and would lose access to their home. So that's something that was starting to happen. That's sort of an example of this seeming like more than just an economic project, or this doesn't sort of seem like this friendly relationship. China is sort of doing much more and having much more power.
So we've got a question here asking, have you been attacked by CCP trolls and agents? But I'm guessing more broadly, what has been the CCP reaction towards this documentary? Or has there been a reaction to it?
So I think the troll comment and the agent comment, yes, yeah. There's, I think, with anything that's posted on social media. So I haven't been. No one from this Chinese government has reached out to me in any way. But yeah, there's been a lot of propaganda that goes back to just sort of full denial that this whole story is made up. That Uyghurs within China are happy and are singing and dancing and are sort of in love with China, and this whole story is false. That's sort of been the CCP's perspective, even though there's been sort of little slip ups from their social media accounts now and then where they sort of inadvertently admit that things are, that things are happening. But I think that's their general stance.
So the documentary, the links, and all that information is in the description below. So make sure you check that out. So what's it going to take for Pakistan? Like, what's going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back, so to speak, for Pakistan to act like some of the countries in the West in labeling it a genocide and taking proper action against China, you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, honestly, I'm already shocked that a Muslim country would not take an aggressive stance in defending Uyghurs, in partnering with the United Nations to sort of make statements and take economic pressure on China. I think unfortunately it is a political situation. So maybe Imran Khan, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, has said even after years and years of this Uyghur oppression, that he's unaware of what's happening, and still sort of claims that China is this breath of fresh air and is sort of this best friend to Pakistan. So as long as I don't know, as long as Pakistan is in this economic corner, sort of, where they feel they need China and they feel sort of trapped and powerless, I guess. It sort of seems like they're going to continue this, like I said, political response that, claiming ignorance, that we don't know what's happening in China, and we're going to continue to work with China. I do think, though, the relationship over the years has soured, and I think that's sort of what's happened. Is I think Pakistan is feeling that they could potentially fall into some kind of debt trap and not be able to pay back the loans to China. And I think some of the things that China has promised Pakistan are starting to fall through and are starting to not happen. So I think, unfortunately, it's the economic, political situation, that is going to, I guess, change Pakistan's mind about China and have them sort of say something and stand up for the Uyghurs. But they're definitely 100% aware of the issue, and they're 100% aware that this this genocide is happening.
So, have you been invited by the Chinese government to visit Xinjiang and to prove you wrong, so to speak, or are you allowed in China? Do you know of this? If you were to apply for a visa?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I have been able to get Chinese visas in the past. It's been a few years since I've applied, and no government official has invited me. And I think that invitation. So there was a few years ago, and maybe there's been more recently. There have been these invitations extended to Pakistani officials or religious leaders in Pakistan to come over to Xinjiang. And I think what happens is they're put in this really fancy hotel and then sort of toured around this sort of Disneyland, sort of make-believe Disneyland, where actors pretending to be Uyghurs, or Uyghurs that are that sort of secretly have guns behind their backs, saying you put a happy face on this, or else are telling these people everything is okay, and then the official is kind of wined and dined and treated like a celebrity, and they return to Pakistan and say, and I think they're I have no idea if this is true, but I think money probably is a part of this too, that they're paid off in some way, and they return to Pakistan and sort of say, everything's fine. We don't have to worry about this. But I think there's no way that China would let me come and see one of these, what they call these re-education camps, or take a tour of this kind of thing. Nobody is allowed to do that sort of thing.
So how do you react to those Westerners who reside in China and go to the Uyghur region and film imams and film? I mean, you and I know what the answer is, but for those who are not caught up on Chinese propaganda, what do you say to those, generally white? They may be Americans or Canadians or English or even recently New Zealand. They go there, they say everything's cool, and people buy into this. Could you explain what is your reaction to that sort of propaganda?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I actually would step back a bit just to sort of say. So I'm from talking to you from the United States, where the the U.S. government, the U.S. Secretary of State have openly said that this is genocide within China. So the major players, I think, are saying are using this very powerful word genocide to describe what's happening. I mean, I think the people that you're talking about, I mean, are not even real people at all, like are just are just sort of copy and pasted profile pictures to social media, or they're China has huge pockets to to pay people and support, this enormous propaganda campaign. So it's, in my opinion, those people are either not real or just, employees of the Chinese government, coming in and saying everything is fine.
So those sorts of people are let into film and interview those imams and saying everyone can religiously practice and they're free to do whatever they want. Hypothetically, if you were in right now and you were given a journalist a pass to do some journalism in the Uyghur region, hypothetically, what would your experience be like? Just for our audience sake.
Yeah. So first off, if you go to China on a journalism visa, you actually have to pay for what they call a minder, a person from the government that follows you around and takes notes and reports back to the government every few hours or every night about what you're doing. So just the fact that if you were applying for a journalism visa, you're going to set up this process where you're followed and monitored, and the government knows everything that you're going to do. And obviously visas are set up in advance, so they've got some time to sort of set something up, let's say. And I actually don't know the videos that you're talking about where people are going and saying everything's okay. I more see the videos where journalists are trying to work in China, and these government minders or employees of the government are coming in and making them pull their cars over or putting their hands in front of the camera and say, you can't film this, and then forcing them to leave and revoking their visa. So that's the scenario that I'm sort of most aware of, and I think that's what would happen to me. And I think anyone that I would try to talk to inside China would be punished for talking to me. So if I found a Uyghur that was able to talk to me, that for some reason, and was able to be honest with me, the government would already be following me and would know that I'm talking to that person, and would likely put that person in one of these camps for punishment for talking to a journalist. So the situation is really sort of impossible, I think, to report inside Xinjiang. And I've been to Xinjiang before. It was several years ago, and Xinjiang was like a military zone where there were Chinese army, or Chinese police in full riot gear just everywhere, and this whole city was sort of on this lockdown, and everyone was terrified. So that's the experience that I've had.
Wow. We're sort of getting to the end of the show. Could you speak to, are there any future projects regarding Uyghurs that are coming up, or China in general even, that you would like to share with us?
Yeah, I hope that this Pakistan documentary is going to be a larger film that I'm continuing on. So I'm going to go into more in depth. I'm going to go into more in depth into this story. And as you see in the film, it isn't, the Uyghur story isn't the only sort of human rights story within Pakistan. There are major issues happening in Baluchistan and happening to other minority groups. And we kind of see, I honestly sort of see the film as this story of these groups that are sort of, pushing back against China, that this sort of effort is all sort of coming from, from Pakistan, from these sort of minority groups from within the country. So that's sort of the story I'm going to continue to try to tell, though, as you state with China, access is more and more difficult for me. And, I'm more and more sort of fearful of the subjects that appear on camera. So everyone that appears in my documentary is currently in a safe location, and I've worked to try to keep them safe. But my fear is that it's a very dangerous project to have people speak about.
Everybody, I would like to thank Brent for his time today. You can find all the details of the documentary in the description below. Make sure you follow him with all the work that he does. Thank you so much, Brent, for joining us today and enlightening us. And hopefully, I would love to have you back on our show to talk about your future projects.
Wonderful. Yes, I would love that. And thank you so much for having me today. And thank you to your audience.
Thank you. Brothers and sisters, until next time, peace be upon you all. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Ümit üzme aziz halqim, ümit üzme ey ana yurt. Biz atlandık bu küreşke, o yıl taştek uyuşup. Allah verse bu nusretni, bizgilerimiz